Good evening. Welcome to Got Money. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. A lot of phone calls in the last week from nieces and nephews wanting to know, Auntie Liz, am I going to get kicked out of my rental accommodation? I'm like, I don't even know how to dismantle that for you. So I went on a hunt, and I obviously went to someone that thinks legislation is the best thing since sliced bread and the invention of the wheel. I welcome Hayley Mitchell to Got Money. Hey, Hayley, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And yes, I do love legislation. It's my favourite topic.
It is. It's weird, but it's true. So the landscape is entirely unique. And I guess there are landlords out there right now that are panicked, but there are also tenants out there that are under a lot of stress and strain. So what's the law on this?
Okay, so we were hoping we'd get some government announcements before we chatted, and not much has come through yet. We're still waiting for the states to give us some clarity around what we can and can't do. So until we actually get that clarity, it's business as usual. The legislation stays as it is now. The only change is that we can't evict anyone for a 6-month period if they are affected by COVID. So, for example, someone loses their job, they're in hardship, they can't pay the rent, then they're safe. They can live in the property for up to 6 months. That doesn't mean that they don't have to pay rent. You know, the rent is still payable. We just can't evict them for that 6-month period. So there's that, I guess, really grey area for us as property managers and owners and tenants as well. But we've just got to, I think, take every situation on a case-by-case scenario at the moment. And the people that are really suffering that hardship, we have to work with them to try and make sure that they feel safe and secure as well.
My nephew said that out of the 3 people living in his rental accommodation right now, 2 of them have lost their jobs. And they're trying to engage in a conversation with the tenancy manager about if there's any room for negotiation. Because I think there are people out there that have applied for a benefit and are more than likely waiting for that to come through. What do you do when you've got a tenancy manager that just will not make any allowances for tenants?
Well, they have to. I guess with the whole hardship situation, firstly, a tenant will have to prove hardship. So someone can't just ring up and say, I'm not going to pay my rent anymore because you can't kick me out. We all are in this together. We've got to work out a good scenario for everyone. So I think the first option would probably be to tell the tenants to fill out a hardship form or a letter to the agency stating that they are wanting to negotiate and come up with a payment plan. Let the agency know how much you can pay. And I think that's really important. If you just sit there and go, I'm not paying a cent, well, that's a massive detriment to the landlord as well. And a lot of tenants, I guess when there was a government announcement a few weeks ago and they said, you know, you can't kick out tenants for 6 months, but he didn't actually say at that time that people had to keep paying their rent. And then it's come out later that ScoMo said, well, you still need to pay your rent if you can pay your rent. So there's been all these, I guess, vigilante groups which have said, we're going to go on a rent strike, and we're not going to pay a cent, and owners can put their mortgages on hold, which in some cases you can, but in some cases those mortgage payments are just deferred or capitalised onto the end of the loan. So yes, an owner might be able to put a mortgage on hold, but at the end of the day it might then cost them an extra $10,000 in interest to do so. So it's not a free ride for anyone. And I think that's how we need to take every case on a case-by-case scenario when we have a rent roll as well. So we have about 250 properties under management. And we had probably 5 tenants call up when ScoMo made the first announcement and said, what do? I can't pay my rent, I'm in hardship. We talked them through the process, and 1 tenant has actually then filled out a hardship form, and we're giving her relief on her rent at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean the rent doesn't have to be paid. It just means that some of her rent is being deferred to a later date. And for that particular tenant, we're not going to be, serving her with eviction notices or notices to vacate or anything like that. We know that she's on a payment plan, she's paying what she can. And with that particular tenant as well, we're on the phone to her every 2 days, just making sure that she's okay. Because
isn't that great?
Like we've got it, these people are really, really struggling, and we're not ringing it to say, is your rent being paid? We're ringing it to say, how are you going? Is there anything we can do? Because and I originally thought with 250, we're going to get smashed with all of these rent reliefs. We actually haven't. It's such a small number of people. We've also had some awesome tenants that have rung up and said, just can you let the owner know that I'm fine, I'm going to keep paying rent, please tell them not to freak out. And I think that's really nice as well, because everyone's freaking out, and in order to just go, oh, do you know what, we can still pay the rent, you can still pay your mortgage, this is going to be fine. So a lot of people are really working together. But communication's a key. You just got to open the lines of communication.
So everything in writing between yourself and the tenancy manager. Now, because you got an interesting letter. Do you want to read that letter? Have you got that letter handy? You got to hear this letter. Hayley and I doubled over. Yeah. Read the letter.
So this was sent through one of the website inquiries. So basically an anonymous person jumped on a website and sent this through with a fake phone number, of course. And the wording is, it's party time, no rent for 6 months and you can't evict us. These are the days that make renting so cool. Seriously, we've decided that in light of this situation, we will not be paying rent for 6 months. We'll let everyone know, since real estate seem to be keeping this on the down low. Given that banks have frozen home loans, so no one is out of pocket, please avoid doing any house inspections as we will be in isolation. Yabba Dabba Do. Yeah.
It's just the Yubba Dabba Do that gets me. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. I think there are people out there that believe that if they just stop paying rent, there are no consequences. Do you want to unpack what that actually looks like?
Yeah, there are. Okay, we can't evict you. That's fine. I understand that, and I'm for that. For people that are in hardship, no one wants them to be evicted, but we need to work out a way where we can still afford or get that rental paid, even if it's deferred or even if you go on a payment plan. So say your rent's $300 a week, one of you's lost your job, the other one can't afford to pay it, you're waiting for government subsidies to come through as well, then maybe you can go on to $150 a week and defer that $150 to a later date when the government subsidy comes in. Your owner might be in a good financial position where they say, do you know what, I'll give you rent free for a week, or I'll give you a reduction of your rent of $50 a week. Now, there is absolutely no rule that an owner has to do that, but we have had some owners come forward. We had one of our landlords come forward and say, please reduce the rent by $45 a week for the next 3 months. Now, that was on her accord, and we went to the tenants and told them, and they were absolutely rapt. But you don't have to do that. Like, it's not an obligation for an owner to do it. So it will be case by case. And I think that the people that can afford to help will, and the people that can't will still expect that the rent gets paid.
So I think what the misunderstanding about this rental landscape is that if you decide that it's Yubba Dabba Do time, you will get evicted after the 6 months.
Correct.
And more than likely, the consequence of Yubba Dabba Do is that you will never be able to rent another property again in Melbourne. Is that fair to say that?
Absolutely, yeah. Because that's not working with anyone. That's not communicating with anyone. It's you can't just say, I'm not going to pay. You have to come up with a scenario or a payment plan or communication that allows you to not get too far behind. And I think all these government subsidies, there's been, an incredible amount of money that's being thrown at people in order for them to help them out. You've got the JobKeeper, the job seeker, and a whole lot of other scenarios. So I think a lot of people will short term be out of pocket, but hopefully long term they won't, once all these subsidies and grants kick in as well.
I think that's what's great about the government. It's trying to stabilise that other economy, which isn't just about food It's also about shelter, and shelter is that rental market and the commercial market. I mean, there were announcements around the commercial leasing space. Is that right? What are the
Yeah,
government doing with that? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm not on top of all of that. A lot
Okay.
came through yesterday on that one. I'm a residential agent, so my focus is purely resi, and I saw a couple of things pop up on Facebook, but I haven't studied into that one yet. So
No, I think your plate is full with residential legislation, really, quite frankly. Okay, so here's a scenario.
Yep.
And I'm going to go back to my nephew because, and I think that it's important to do this because there are some tenancy managers that are not as communicative as you are. And the team there at his house are really, they've always paid rent on time. He said, look, we just paid our rent. But the tenancy managers really just are creating a hard line called we are not giving you any benefits. There is no subsidies. We are not negotiating. There is no hardship. What can he do as a consequence of this?
I would probably put in writing that due to the current, climate, this is what we can afford to pay.
Yeah.
And ask for a deferral in rental payments. I would also give the agent a plan as to how you will make up that money or what government subsidies you think would be coming in. So give them an idea and say, for the month of April, for example, we're going to, if we can reduce our rent to this amount, but in May when the subsidies start kicking in, we'll start paying this, and then work out a bit of a payment plan to give them a clear indication of how it's going to roll out. So then the owner can also start budgeting as well. And I think what tenants often don't realise is it's not always the property manager, it's sometimes the landlord.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We actually don't make decisions, we give advice. But then if a landlord decides to go down a certain path, then we have to follow that advice. So for example, one thing that we've decided to do at our agency is we're not doing any rent increases, which is, in this landscape, I don't think it's right to be increasing people's rent. We just want to wait until everything settles down. However, if a landlord says my rent's due to be increased, you need to increase it, we have to follow their instructions. So it's not always the property manager. Now, sometimes it is the property manager and they're not working with tenants correctly. But a lot of the time we get blamed as agents and people go, oh, the evil agent. And it's not always the evil agent. Sometimes it's the owner. Sometimes it's the tenant.
Evil owner. Sometimes it's the evil owner.
Yeah. And look, I think that for people that are genuine and honestly suffering hardship, I would be very surprised if an agent did not take compassion and show compassion and empathy and try and sort out the situation. I'd be really disappointed. Like in the case that you've got with your nephew, pick up the phone and say, what's going on? Let's have a chat. Let's work it out, and then document the plan in writing, because we can't evict them. So technically he could just stop paying the rent.
But the consequences of, and he knows this, because I said this to him on the phone. I said, buddy, if you stop, the implications to you long term will just be horrendous. Say my nephew can't come up with so he can't be evicted, which is great.
Yeah.
In the long term, if it doesn't go well, is there going to be a seat at VCAT where they can go and have a conversation around this?
VCAT has actually talked about allowing access to get payment plans authorised without going to a hearing. So, for example, if you have, they're talking to RERV on this at the moment, but if you have a situation where, your agent and your tenant and owner decide on a payment plan, for example, usually we just type them up at the office, but they're not legally enforceable because they're not covered by a VCAT order. VCAT's thinking about allowing a situation where you can send all that through to VCAT, and VCAT will put that in an order, which then makes it legally enforceable, which I think is fantastic. The other thing with VCAT at the moment, they're not hearing cases, so they've actually put a hold on any non-urgent cases. Only urgent cases are going before VCAT at the moment, and they are going through Zoom or Skype. I'm not sure which system, but they're not face-to-face. There's a massive backlog of cases as well at the moment. So That's the other difficulty, that if we need to get something sorted out and we need to get to VCAT, we actually can't at the moment because it's a backlog and they're only seeing urgent cases, not non-urgent cases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So Yubba Dabba Do.
Yeah.
Isn't that frightening? That's
Yeah,
Yubba Dabba Do. That's pretty scary for the owner. Because the other side of this too is it's okay for me to talk about my nephew, but I'm also a property investor. And there are big property investors out there that are they own real estate right now whose situation isn't great. What can they do if the tenants? I mean, obviously they can go to the banks and request, but there's nothing that they can do that's enforceable to make the tenant pay the rent, is there?
No, not if they're suffering hardship from COVID. And this is where, your Yabba Dabba Doos have taken advantage of the situation and said, well, I'm just not going to pay my rent. They haven't said they're in hardship. They haven't said they've lost their job. They're just saying, hey, it's party time. I'm not going to pay my rent. And for the people in genuine hardship, we'll work with them. For the people that are the Yabba Dabba Doos, we won't, because that is just taking advantage of a loophole or a situation that will eventually bite them, because they have to pay the rent and they'll be evicted. And there's groups which are doing a rent strike. So from the 1st of April, they basically sent letters to a whole lot of agents and said, we've got 15 people in the Stonington area that are going on a rent strike and we will not be paying rent for the next 6 months. And they're sending out letters to agencies saying your tenants are on a rent strike, so don't chase them, we're not paying it. And then if agents respond, they're then publicising the agents in a Facebook group and saying who they are and their responses. So it's actually, it's become a real them against us scenario, which is something that we don't want. We want to work with people. Tell us the situation, we'll work with you, we'll organise something that works for everyone, we'll keep clear lines of communication, and then we won't have this angst and anxiety about, any of this situation. We just need to work with people. And I think a lot of people have taken the Yabba Dabba Do approach or the strike approach. It's not the right approach.
Yeah, because the consequences of Yubba Dabba Do is that they're never going to get a rental property at the other side of this.
Correct.
So where do people go? So if you want information and you're a tenant, where do you go to find that information?
Government websites. So there's heaps of information online. Centrelink as well. Obviously, they've got a whole lot of different scenarios. Now, as agents, we can't give financial advice. We can say to you, hey, jump on the website, see what's available for you. But we've got to be very, very careful about we don't want to step over that line of financial advice. Yeah. So it's just basically jump online and see what you're entitled to.
And the same for landlords. Can landlords, where can landlords find out what their legislative rights are in this climate?
My accountant's actually been really, really good because we're self-employed. So we have our businesses and we're employed through them. My accountant's been great. So as soon as he's got information, he shoots it off to me. Again, jumping online, there's heaps of information online. There's grants that are available for businesses as well. Then you've got the JobKeeper entitlements which help. There's a heap of info. So we've just been sort of researching everything at the moment to see what's available for us and also people that we know. But I think the government, a lot of those subsidies are going to start kicking in soon, which will really help.
Are you happy with the government's response to what we're in?
That's a loaded question, isn't it?
Well, she just took a big deep breath.
The short answer, no. Yes, I'm happy with the subsidies and the information that's being put out from that side of the equation. But for residential tenancies, residential tenancies affects millions of people. And when they come out and say half a situation, that then caused us a massive problem, because as soon as ScoMo said, there's that moratorium on the rental evictions for 6 months, but didn't say, but you've still got to pay your rent, everyone was ringing us the next day going, we're not paying rent. So then we're dealing with that. And then we're saying to them, no, you've got to still pay your rent because it's not a free ride. And then explaining that. So we were bombarded with inquiries from tenants and landlords that night that were all freaking out. Then ScoMo came up and said, no, you will, they've still got to pay it, so that's fine. So that's cleared the air a little bit since then. But we want to know, and we're waiting for the state leaders to now say, this is what residential tenancies looks like, and this is what you can and can't do. Because we actually don't know whether we still should be serving notices of notice to vacate, for example. So if a tenant's more than 14 days in arrears, we serve a notice to vacate. Now, we don't know if we're still meant to do that or not. Now, if we don't do that, there could be insurance implications on the owner. Because if we don't follow what the legislation states, and the legislation currently says that when a tenant's more than 14 days in arrears, you serve a notice. So if we don't do that, then insurance might not kick in. But then if we do that, we're going against what the government's saying where we can't evict people. So we just need clarity.
When will you get that?
Hopefully next week. But it was meant to be Friday 2 weeks ago, then Friday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday.
Got it. So I tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we pencil in another conversation, because I'd be really interested to hear about how that looks. Are you still getting rental inquiry? Are people, what's the situation?
We're super busy. So we've got a 3D Matterport camera, which is awesome, and we're the only one in our area that's got one. So we 3D, it's good. We 3D scan all of our properties, so people do a virtual tour. So basically they do a virtual tour. If they like the property, they can apply. We'll then get them approved, and then we'll say to them, we can show you through one-on-one, which we're allowed to still do as long as we're being safe and adhering to all the hygiene standards and social distancing measures, or they can just sign up for the property sight unseen if they don't want to meet us face to face. So we're actually leasing properties surprisingly quicker than what we were before.
Yeah, because people are jumping on, aren't they? What about managing? You must be, the rigor around checking them out financially must be quite arduous now.
Yeah, and look, it always is. We're really, really careful about the financial side of things, because we want to make sure that tenants are not going to overextend themselves anyway. But yeah, making sure that they do have a secure position, so that they've got money in the bank and they continue to pay the rent, because we don't want to put a tenant into a property and then them lose their job and not be able to afford it. So yeah, definitely it's a little bit more tricky, just to make sure that we're putting the right people in the right properties.
Oh, well, that's good. I'm glad you're busy. Thank you for joining me today and for your time. I really appreciate it. Let's as soon as you get the legislation in, send me an email and I'll get you back on the show. All the best to you. How do our listeners find you?
Probably the best way is via email. So hayley@geelongpm.com.au. My agency in Geelong is called Geelong Property Managers.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hayley. I appreciate your time today. You've been amazing.
No worries. Thanks very much.